I have kept the story for 16 years. 16 years of turning it over in my mind like a manner being a quants mut between his fingers. Лондон куэтреньон убревотайся on the night of November 9, 1963. A day place called the Haberleiten on the corner of Grant and Pacific Street in San Francisco's Chinatown. I was 23 years old. I had 200,000 MOI savings account. A part-time job sweeping flowers at a Kung Fu school on Stockton Street. And absolutely no idea that in 3 hours I would witness something that would rearrange every assumption I held about strength, about fighting, and about what it means to be truly dangerous. Only 11 people were in that bar when it happened. 3 of them are still alive. I am one of them. And I am telling you this now because I am yet 4 years old, and the dead deserve their stories told before the living giant era. But I am getting ahead of myself. Before I describe what Bruce Lee did to a effective 157 pound Soviet wrestler, named Dmitry Volkov in 4 seconds, I need you to understand why it happened. Because the violence was never the point. The violence was simply where the lesson lived there. San Francisco in the fall of 1963 was a city balanced between what it had been and what it was becoming. The old Chinatown still smelled of roast dog and dried shrimp. The produce stalls along Stockton still spilled onto the sidewalk in crates of bok choy and winter melon, and the herbalist still mispired as beef and Glasgow oranges with the patience of men who understood that healing was not a thing to be rushed. But the neighborhood was all changing. Beatniks had given way to something louder. Soldiers only drifted through on North Beach. The bars alone browed drew a mix of sailors, longshoremen, tourists, and the occasional professional fighter looking for somewhere dark enough to drink without being recognized. The harbor light tavern occupied a nearest restaurant between a noodle house and a tail shop that had been there since the earthquake of 1906. The bar was maybe 40 feet deep and 15 feet wide, with a ceiling stained brown from decades of cigarette smoke. The counter ran the length of the left wall. Dark walnuts kept by 8,000 glass rings and elbow marks. Behind it, a man named the defunct powered drinks with the measured silence of someone who had seen everything at least twice, and he decided long ago that none of it was worth commenting on. There were 6 stools at the bar, four small round tables against the right wall, and one booth at the very back where the light from the single overhead factory barely reached. The floor was wood, all 10 to hour, and IT grenade when you crossed IT. The whole place smelled of pinotto from the kitchen next door and the faint chemical sweetness of cheap bourbon. I arrived that evening around Ninette Hirte. I remember that because I had just come from my shift at James Lee's Grashinakland, where we had been building a wooden dome mount for breeches training. James Lee, in relation to Bruce, though they were close as brothers, had told me that Bruce might be stopping by Chinatown that weekend. Bruce was 10 Same guessed me, though you would never have guessed it by looking at the side by side. I was waiting, 150 pounds of not much. Bruce was 7.5, 114 pounds, and he moved through the world like something between a cat and a current of late streets. Even sitting still, he gives the impression of motion about to happen. I want to be precise about what Bruce looked like that night, because what happened later makes no sense unless you understand the visual mismatch. He was wearing a dark grey Srenich sweater, black slacks, and plain leather shoes. His hair was combed back neatly. He had no bulk to him his arms. Even in the sweater, looked like the arms of a college student, not a fight. His wrists were narrow, which his neck was slim. When he sat at the bar beside me and ordered a hot Bruce really drank alcohol, there was nothing about him that would have caused anyone in that room to think twice. He looked like a young man who might teach calligraphy or tune pianos. He did not look like the most dangerous person on the entire West Coast. We talked for maybe 20 minutes about nothing important. He told me about a meditation he was making to the psychic, something about generating power from the hip rather than the knee. He sketched diagrams on a cocktail napkin with a ballpoint pen, his hand moving in quick, precise strokes, and he spoke with the kind of vocals that made you feel as though whatever he was explaining was the most important thing in the world. That was Bruce's gift. Not just his speed or his power or his technique, though all of those were extraordinary, but his ability to become completely present in whatever moment he occupied. When Bruce talked to you, you were the only person alive. And then the door opened, and everything changed there. I need to tell you about Dmitry Volkov, because he was not a bad man. I want you to understand that. He was not a villain. He was a product of everything that had shaped him, which is true of all of us, and what shaped Dmitry Volkov was a word that rewarded size and punished softness. He had been born in Leningrad in 1934, the son of a dockworker who died in the seeds. By 17 he was wrestling for the Soviet national junior team. By 20 he had placed third at the European Championships in Greco-Roman at 90 kilograms. By 23 he had defected during a tournament in Helsinki, made his way through West Germany, and eventually landed in San Francisco, where he worked as a bouncer at a club on Broadway and trained at a gym on Polk Street that catered to professional wrestlers and strongmen. He was 6 feet 5 inches tall, 267 pounds. His hands were the size of dinner plates, and I do not say that as Mr. Fry saw those hands up close that night, and each one could have pumped a basketball without strain. His neck was nearly as white as his skull, a column of muscle and tendon that seemed to begin at his ears and somewhere inside his chest. His frames looked like legs of lamb. He had a flat Slavic vase, a broken that had heel crooked, and small blue seddy beneath a brow ridge that looked like it had been carved from a block of birch. When he entered the Harbor Light Tavern at approximately 10:15 that evening, he had to duck slightly to clear the door frame, and the entire room seemed to shrink round him. He was not alone. With him were two men recognized from the GM circuit, an American heavyweight named Carl Dempsey, who fought on the regional Bahin cards, and a Chisney judo man from Japan whose name I never learned. All three of them had been drinking. Stillness his attention. Вичеести was halfway to his lips, and he set it down gently, and he did not turn round, but I saw Witches a shift in the mirror behind the bar, tracking the bus in the revolution. A defunct, who had been wiping a glass, also went still. Eddie had been round long enough to know what certain kinds of stillness meant. Carl continued, emboldened by the laughter. I'm serious. I've been in this town 3 years. Every other block in Chinatown has some guy in silk teaching horses to wave their hands round. You ever seen one of those guys take a real punch? Say it felt like a card table. More laughter from the bus. The judo man said something I couldn't hear. And ten Volkov's paquet. And his voice was different from the other slur, deep, accented with the heavy consonants of his mother tongue, and carrying the particular authority of a man who has never had reason to doubt his own physical supremacy. Chinese cannot fight, he said, not loudly, not aggressively. He said it is the way a man might say that's no cold or that water flows downhill as a simple observation about the nature of the word, so obvious it barely warranted starting. In Russia, we have proverb, the small dog barks. The big dog bites. Chinese martial arts is small dog. Much noise. No teeth. The bar was quiet now. The 4 or 5 other patents a cabro in their 50s near the window, two young men who looked like college students, and an old man in a herringbone coat who had been nursing a whiskey since before they had all stopped their conversations. Everyone had filled the shift. Even the defunct had stopped wiping Uchi's glass. Bruce picked up Uchi's tea and took a sip. He set it down. And then he turned on Ichi's stool, slowly, and looked at Volkov's boots with an expression I had never seen on Ichi's face before and would only see a handful of times after. It was not anger. It was not amusement. It was something closer to clinical interest, the way a surgeon might study and harassing a fracture he intended to repair. That's an interesting theory, Bruce said. Ichi's voice was calm, conversational, pitched just loud enough to cross the room without seeming crazed. But theories only useful until they made reality. Volkov leaned forward in the booth, and to this I found Bruce for the first time, and I watched confusion cross that flat Slavic face. He was looking at a slim young Chinese man in a grey sweater drinking tea. He was looking at everything which his assumptions told him to dismiss. Carl Dempsey actually smirked. You disagree, little friend? Volkov said. There was no hostility yet. There was something worse pity. The condition of a man who believes the conversation is already over. I don't disagree or agree, Bruce said. I observe, and what I observe is that you have a theory about what Chinese people can and cannot do, and you arrived at that theory without any evidence. That's not a proverb. That's a prejudice. Something shifted in Volkov's expression. The pity hardened, which as Zhao said. Beside him, Carl Dempsey was grinning now with a particular delight of a man who smells a fight the way a dog smells meat. You want evidence? Volkov said, and he began to stand. En ze roemsem te chult as he unfolded from the bust of his voetsgewieve, his shoulders blocking the light from the back wall. I give you evidence. I wrestle since I am boy. I remain bigger than you like sacks of grain. I break arm of Turkish champion in Helsinki. You what do? You drink tea. Bruce did not stand. Not yet. He remained on his stool, which his body angled toward Volkov, one elbow resting on the bar, and the composure in his posture was so currently that it almost looked like interference. But I was close enough to see his frames beneath the pushed-up sleeves of his sweater, and the muscles there had changed the day he shifted from real head to reduce the way a cold spring looks at each out to a loose one until you understand what you are seeing. I don't want to fight you, Bruce said. You've been drinking. This isn't the place. And fighting to prove a point is fighting for the wrong reason. Carl damped the lift. There it is. The small dog barks. And Volkov, who had been watching Bruce with the narrowed focus of a man trying to read something written in a language he doesn't speak, took one step forward, then not, until he was standing in the middle of the bar's narrow floor, perhaps 6 feet from where Bruce sat. At that distance, the size difference was almost a micro. Volkov's chest was at the level of Bruce's eyes, which his shadow fell over Bruce like a curtain. Every person in that room, myself included, and I am ashamed to admit that every person felt the same thing. Certainty that if something physical happened, the small man would be destroyed. Stand up, Volkov said, which his voice dropped to something quiet and denser. The way stone is quiet and denser. Stand up and show me what Chinese fighting looks like. I promise I will be gentle. Bruce said, which he sat down. He looked at the cup for a moment, as though considering something only he could see. And then he stood, and I want to describe this precisely because a team matters. He did not stand the way a man stands when he is preparing to fight. He did not square his shoulders or raise his fists or widen his stance. He simply rose from the stool with a fluid economy of water finding its level, and he stood there, hands at his sides, feet shouldered apart. His weight distributed so evenly that he appeared almost afloat. He looked up at Volkov the way a man looks up at a mountain he intends to climb. You are sure? Bruce said. I am sure. Eddie Fong set his glass down and took a step back from the bar. The cabru blew out the window stood and pressed against the wall. The college students gripped their drinks. The old man in the herringbone coat simply watched with a that just as he had seen men fight before and knew what the moments before contact looked like. What happened next took no more than 5 seconds. I know this because I have replayed it in my mind 10,000 times across 6 decades, and each time I have tried to stretch those seconds into something my memory could hold properly, and each time the sheer speed of it defeats me. But I will tell you why. Volkov moved first. He was a wrestler, and this was close distance. At his right hand shot forward not a punch but a grab, the instinctive reach of a grappler who wants to seize a collar, a wrist, a throat, anything that will allow him to push the 157 pounds of leverage. His hand was enormous, and it moved with surprising speed for a manager's size, and it aimed directly for the front of Bruce's weight. I took out there. Bruce had shifted, not stepped back, not dodged there, not dog shifted. His entire body relegated perhaps 4 inches to the right, a movement so minimal that it barely registered as movement at all, and Volkov's grab passed through the space where Bruce's chest had been a fraction of a second earlier. The Russian's fingers closed on nothing, and in the instant of that closure in the tiny window of time when Volkov's weight was carried forward and his hand was extended and his balance existed somewhere between where he had been and where he intended to go, Bruce hit him. I need to slow this down, because what Bruce did in the next 1.5 seconds contained more technical information than most fighters absorb in a year of training. His right hand came up from his side in a trajectory that was not a hook and not an uppercut and not a straight punch, but something that contained the elements of all 3. A rising linear streak that began at his hip and ended at Volkov's sour plexus. The fist did not travel more than 14 inches. There was no indupe, no chambering, no telegraphing of any kind. The power came from somewhere that the other fighters in that room could not identify, because it did not come from the arm. It came from the floor. It came up through Bruce's rear foot, through the rotation of his hip, through the alignment of his spine, throws a connection over his shoulder, and the tira that with his fist vis a kind of focus totalite that turned 140 pounds into something that hit like a freight car coupling. The sound I made was not what you expect a pawns to sound like. There was no slap, no toit. There was a deep percussive crack, like a baseball butt striking a side of beef in a cold room, and the tia kota was also the light turn and silenced whatever residual sound still existed in that space. Volkov's body folded. There is no other word for it. It is the upper arm seized, which is lungs emptied, and which is torso jackknife forward as thou some monkey caught the cables holding him upright. 267 pounds of Soviet-trained muscle collapsed inward round the point of impasse like a building imploding from the center, which is more painted but no sound came out. I cheers went white not with pain, not yet, but with the poor comprehension of a man whose body has just done something each his mind cannot explain. He did not foul, not immediately. I just legs healed, but they healed the way a table holds when one leg is short ten the others with a roundness, a visible disagreement between intention and capacity. He staggered one step backward, which is an enormous hint reaching for the edge of the bar to steady himself, and he found IT, and he gripped IT, and for a moment he hung there like a ship listing a guy in a dock, and Bruce had not moved. He stood exactly where he had stood when the streaky landed, which his right fist still extended at the point of contact, which his body still in the rotational position that he generated the fires. He held that position for one heartbeat, 2, 3, and 10 he lowered to his fist and returned to his neutral stance. Shensa to his sides. Weight centered, ich pression unchanged there. The entire bar was frozen. I was frozen. Eddie Funk was frozen with both hands flat on the counter. Carl Dempsey was frozen in the booth with his beer halfway to his mouth. The old man in the herringbone coat was frozen with his whiskey glasses suspended in midair. Even they seemed frozen, the cigarettes mage hanging in motionlessly as though the atmosphere itself had been stunned. 5 seconds. From Volkov grabbed to the absolute silence of that room. 5 seconds had passed, and in those 5 seconds every assumption about size, about strength, about what it meant to be dangerous had been dismantled with the precision of a watchmaker removing a over. But IT was not over. I get to what happened next. But first I need you to understand what I saw in Volkov says in the seconds after that streaky, because that is where the real story lives. IT was not humanitarian. IT was not raids. IT was something I have spent 15 years searching for the right word to describe, and the closest I have come is this, revelation. He looked like a man who has just been shown a dowry in a wall he believed was solid. Volkov pushed himself upright from the bar. He was breathing in shallow gusts. It is the upper arm still recovering from the shock, and his face had gone in the color of old candle wicks. But he was a wrestler. He had been thrown, choked, bent, and battered since boyhood. Pain was a language he spoke fluently, and to which his body had learned to set on inside IT. He straightened. He squared to his massive shoulders. And he looked at Bruce Lee with an impression that he changed entirely from what IT had been 30 seconds earlier. The pity was gone. The condition was gone. Audrey Platz's term was something rawer and more honest, the focus of a man who suddenly understands he is in a real fight with someone who can hear him. Volkov's wrestling training took over. As Volkov's level dropped, Bruce's hips and girl back in a movement that wrestling, catches call a sprawl, but cowling what Bruce did a sprawl is like cowling a symphony a noise. Edge's hips drove downward onto the back of Volkov's neck with a timing so exact that the Russian's forward momentum was redirected straight into the flyer. Volkov's forward grazed the warped wood planks. Edge's arms closed on empty space where Bruce's legs had been. And in the same continuous motion, and this is a part that still honors me, Bruce's right elbow descended towards the back of Volkov's passed neck, dropping like a stone, accelerating with gravity and torque and something that looked less like technique and more like natural law. IT stopped. The elbow stopped. IT stopped one from the cervical vertebrae at the base of Dmitry Volkov's skull, in the precise location where sufficient downward force would cause the kind of injury that ends not fights but lives. Bruce held IT there, suspended, a guillotine blade frozen at the bottom of its arc, and in the silence of that bar, with Volkov face down on the wooden floor and Bruce's elbow hovering above the most vulnerable point on the human spine, everyone understood what they were seeing. They were seeing what Bruce Lee chose not to do, and that choice was lower than any streaky he could have landed. Bruce stayed in that position for 3 full seconds. Long enough for Volkov to feel the presence of the elbow uitward feeling iets impatst. Long enough for every witness in that room to comprehend the geometry of what had almost happened. Long enough for Carl Dempsey's smirk to dissolve like salt in water. And then Bruce withdrew the elbow, plaatst his pamphlet on Volkov's back gently, the way you might touch a horse to commit and step through. He extended his hand downward. "Get up," he said. His voice was unchanged there. His breathing was unchanged there. He might as well have been continuing our conversation about the mechanics of the sidekick. "Get up. It's over." Volkov lay there for a moment, with his cheek pressed against the flower boards, with his massive body completely still. And then he did something that I did not expect. He reached up and took Bruce's hand. And Bruce, who weighed 114 pounds, pulled Dmitry Volkov, who weighed 267 to his feet, and the ease with which he did it was perhaps the most unsettling demonstration of the entire encounter, because it suggested reserves of strength that had not even been necessary. Volkov stood there, breathing hard, one hand on the sour plechus where the streak had landed. A bruise was already forming beneath his shirt I saw it later, a purple starburst the size of a grapefruit, and it lasted for 3 weeks. He looked at Bruce, and he looked at his own hands, and he looked back at Bruce, and what came out of his mouth was not what any of us expected. "How?" he said. One word, barely above a whisper. But in that single syllable was more genuine curiosity, more authentic desire to understand, than in anything he had said all evening. The arrogance was not merely suppressed, it was gone, burned through like fucking morning sun, and what remained was the raw quern of a man who has just discovered that the world is larger than he thought. Bruce looked at him for a long moment, and then he did something that changed Dmitry Volkov's life, and mine, and the lives of everyone in that bar, even though most of them didn't realize it until years later. He pulled out the stool next to the one he had been sitting on, and he jeered for Volkov to sit down, and he said to the phone, "Touches, please." And Dmitry Volkov 6'5", Tasik Soviet wrestling champion, a man who had walked into that bar believing he existed at the top of a hierarchy determined by size and strength, sat down on that stool like a student taking a seat on the first day of school. What followed was a conversation that lasted nearly 2 hours, and I sat beside him and listened to every word. I will not pretend to remember it all perfectly, but certain passages have stayed with me the way certain lines of poetry stay with you, not because you memorized them, but because they lodged themselves in the part of your mind that stores things that matter. Bruce began with water. He always began with water. "You are a wrestler," he said to Volkov. "You are very good. Your technique is strong. Your body is powerful. Your training is deep. But your eyes, you are frozen in one shape. You can only do what eyes that yes, you can be hard, you can be cold, you can be heavy, but you cannot flow. And when something that flows meets something that is frozen, the water goes round the eyes. Every time." Volkov frowned. "I don't understand." "You grabbed it for me," Bruce said. "You committed your weight and your intention to a single action, see the opponent. Bring him to the ground, who see your strength. That is what your training taught you, and against most people, it works. But I was not in the place where your hands went. I was already somewhere else. Not because I am faster than you, because I was not committed to being in any particular place. Water does not resist. IT does not block. IT simply is not where the power thrives." Volkov was quiet for a long time. I could see him processing this, turning IT over the way he might turn over a wrestling technique he had never encountered. And then he said something that surprised me. "In wrestling, they teach you to meet fully. Have measures, lose matches. You are seeing the opposite." "No," Bruce said. I am seeing meet fully to being present, not to a predetermined action. There is a difference. Your commitment was to a plan grab him, take him down, use my weight. My commitment was to this moment whatever it requires, I will provide. Your plan was decided before the fight. My response was decided before the fight itself. I watched Volkov's face change as Bruce Paquet, and what I saw there was not merely intellectual understanding. It was something deeper, a kind of structural rearrangement, as though the framework through which he had interpreted the world was being quietly disassembled and rebuilt into something more spacious.